Dr. Amanda Foster had spent nearly 2 decades examining photographs that most people would never want to look at closely. Victorian mourning portraits, post-mortem images of infants laid out as if sleeping, stiff family groups taken in the days when exposure times forced everyone to freeze like statues. She had seen them all. The humid August morning in 2024, when the Richardson portrait arrived, should have been routine. Instead, the moment she slid the old print under her examination lamp, something in her chest tightened. The image showed a well-to-do family in a Richmond parlor around 1910. Heavy oak furniture, patterned wallpaper, a potted fern in the corner. A man in a dark suit stood behind a seated woman. 3 children were arranged around them. Everything about the composition was conventional, yet Amanda's trained eye kept returning to the middle child, a girl who looked about 10. The girl was smiling. That smile was wrong. It was not the tight, awkward smile of a child told to hold still for a long exposure. It was too wide, too even, and completely without life. The eyes did not focus on the camera or on anything else in the room. They were open, but empty. There was no catch light, no tiny spark of reflection from the photographer's lamps. Every other face in the picture had those small points of light. Hers did not. Amanda spent 3 hours with high-resolution scans, magnification tools, and comparison software. The longer she looked, the colder the office felt despite the summer heat outside. Finally, she picked up the phone and called Dr. Robert Chen, a forensic pathologist who had helped her before with historical medical puzzles. Chen arrived that evening. He stood in silence for a long time in front of the large monitor, zooming in on the girl's face, her hands, the way her body sat in the chair. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Look at the skin tone. Even allowing for the limitations of 1910 photography, there is a waxy quality here that the others don't have. And the eyes, nothing, no reflection at all. This child was dead when the picture was taken. Amanda already knew, but hearing it said aloud made it real. Post-mortem photography was not unheard of in 1910, though it was becoming less common. Families sometimes wanted a final image of a loved one at rest. What made this different was the deliberate attempt to make the dead girl look alive and happy, smiling among her living siblings and parents. The photograph had arrived with almost no documentation, only a handwritten note identifying it as the Richardson family of Richmond, circa 1910, and a list of names: Father Richardson, Mother Dorothy. Children Michael, Elizabeth, and Sarah. Census records confirmed the family Richard Richardson, 38, bank manager. Dorothy, 35. 3 children living in a large house on Grove Avenue in the Fan District. The 1920 census, however, listed only 4 people. Elizabeth was gone. Virginia death records supplied the rest. Elizabeth Richardson died on 15 March 1910 at the age of 10. Cause of death, scarlet fever. The death certificate was signed by Dr. James Whitmore. 2 days later, on the 17th of March, an invoice from Hamilton Portrait Studio recorded a family portrait session with special arrangements. The fee was nearly 3 times the normal rate. Amanda contacted the Virginia Historical Society. They sent a short biography of Thomas Hamilton, the photographer who ran the studio from 1895 to 1925. One line stood out: Hamilton was known for his careful handling of memorial and post-mortem work, though the practice declined sharply after 1910. With Chen's medical credentials, they gained access to Dr. Whitmore's archived papers at the Medical College of Virginia. In the records for early 1910, they found Elizabeth's file and, attached to it, a letter from Dorothy Richardson dated 16 March, the day after her daughter's death. Dorothy wrote that her husband's grief was too much to bear. He insisted on a final family portrait, not a memorial image of the child at rest, but one in which Elizabeth appeared as she had in life, smiling and present. She begged the doctor to help prepare the body so the photographer could create that image. She feared for her husband's mind if they could not give him this one last picture of the complete family. Whitmore's reply was reluctant but clear. He agreed, out of concern for Richard Richardson's mental health, and would prepare the child the following morning. The great-grandson of the photographer, Edward Hamilton, still lived in Alexandria and still kept his ancestors' journals. In the leather-bound volume covering 1908 to 1912, the entry from March 17, 1910, was long and troubled. Hamilton described the most disturbing assignment of his career. The dead girl had been carefully prepared, Cosmetics, positioning, even the manipulation of facial muscles to create a smile. The two living children were forced to sit beside her for nearly half an hour. The mother wept quietly while trying to keep her face composed. The father stood behind them with an expression Hamilton could only call desperate madness. Hamilton wrote that he had taken many dignified memorial portraits that helped families grieve. This was something else. This was the denial of death itself. Amanda and Chen brought in Dr. Lisa Morrison, a psychiatrist who specialized in historical trauma and complicated grief. Hospital records showed that Richard Richardson was admitted to Tucker Pavilion in October 1910, 7 months after the photograph was taken. Admission notes described severe melancholia and delusional thinking centered on the deceased daughter. He had become obsessed with the portrait, speaking to it, claiming Elizabeth was still alive inside the image, setting a place for her at the dinner table. When Dorothy finally hid the photograph, he became violent and was hospitalized. He remained there for 6 months. Dorothy's letters to the hospital physicians were heartbreaking. In one, she wrote that her husband spoke to the picture as if Elizabeth could hear him. The photograph that was meant to comfort him had instead severed his connection to reality. She wished they had never taken it. Through genealogical work, they located a descendant of the surviving siblings. Michael Richardson's grandson, Thomas, lived in Charlotte and still held family papers that had never been made public. Among them were typed pages Michael had written late in life, in the 1970s, trying at last to process what had happened when he was 12. He described watching Dr. Whitmore work on his sister's body that March morning. The powders, the paints, the wire frame that held her upright in the chair, the way the doctor pulled the corners of her mouth upward to create the smile. He remembered his mother sobbing in the next room. He remembered Sarah, only 8, whispering over and over that Elizabeth was not alive until their father shouted at her to be quiet. He remembered the coldness of his sister's body beside him during the long exposure. He wrote that he had never fully understood or forgiven what his father made them do. Sarah's own diary from 1910 survived as well, a small leather book she had kept hidden all her life. The entries from March were short and devastating. The 15th of March, Elizabeth died today. Mama says she is with the angels now. The 16th of March, Papa says we will take a family picture. He says Elizabeth will be in it. Mama is crying all the time. The 17th of March, today was the worst day. They made Elizabeth smile, but her eyes were wrong. I had to sit next to her. Papa said I must not move or cry. I was so scared. Elizabeth was there, but she wasn't there. Michael held my hand very tight. The 20th of March, I can't sleep. I keep seeing Elizabeth smile. It wasn't her smile. The 28th of March, Mama wants to destroy the photograph. Papa won't let her. He looks at it every night. He talks to it. I'm afraid of Papa now. The 15th of October, Papa went to the hospital today. He was screaming that we had hidden Elizabeth from him. I'm glad he's gone. I'm sorry he's sick, but I'm glad he's gone. I never want to see that photograph again. Neither Michael nor Sarah ever married. The trauma of that morning stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Dr. Patricia Vance, a medical historian from Johns Hopkins who specialized in Victorian and Edwardian death practices, joined the research. She confirmed that the Richardson case was not unique. Between 1900 and 1915, there were at least 15 other documented instances in which deceased children had been posed as if still alive rather than peacefully at rest. Medical journals of the period had begun to warn against the practice, noting that such images could deepen denial and interfere with healthy mourning. Thomas Hamilton himself refused every similar request after the Richardson sitting. In a letter to a colleague in 1911, he wrote that these photographs did not comfort, they tormented. They preserved not memories but nightmares. Richard Richardson was released from the hospital in April 1911. He returned to his work at the bank, but was described by contemporaries as a changed man, withdrawn, melancholic. He died of heart failure in 1923 at the age of 51. Dorothy lived until 1945. The photograph remained a hidden wound in the family for generations. In October 2024, Amanda Foster presented the full findings at a conference on forensic photography and historical death practices at the Smithsonian Institution. The Richardson portrait was shown only with extensive contextual explanation. Dr. Morrison gave a companion talk on the psychology of denial-based mourning. She explained that the smile in the photograph was disturbing precisely because it represented a fundamental violation of the natural process of grief. Acceptance of death is necessary for psychological healing. By creating an image that denied Elizabeth's death, the family had created a lasting artifact of denial, one that traumatized the surviving children and contributed to the father's mental collapse. After consultation with the remaining Richardson descendants, the Library of Congress made its decision. The photograph would be preserved in the archives for legitimate historical and research purposes. It would not be publicly exhibited or published without clear, substantial context. Thomas Richardson, speaking for the family, said simply that his grandfather and great-aunt had suffered because of what their father's grief had forced them to do. Elizabeth deserved to be remembered as the 10-year-old child who died of scarlet fever in 1910, not as the smiling corpse in a photograph that had haunted a family for more than a century. On the final day of the investigation, Amanda stood once more in her office and looked at the image before it was transferred to secure storage. Elizabeth Richardson's smile, that impossible, arranged smile, stared back across 114 years. It was a smile created by the handling of dead muscle, a smile that had never expressed joy or life. It was the visible record of a father's desperate refusal to accept loss, a mother's helpless compliance, and the quiet trauma inflicted on two children who were made to take part in something that violated both nature and their own understanding of the world. The photograph remains as evidence not of a family's love, but of how grief, when it cannot face reality, can create something that echoes across generations. Elizabeth Richardson died in March 1910. The forced smile that was meant to keep her present continued to cause pain long after everyone who had known her was gone, until, at last, the full story could be told honestly, and the image could be laid to rest with the dignity it had always lacked.